Lately, I've been posting some of the art from my upcoming animation, Tale of Loneliness. It's crazy, queer, and a bit creepy, just like our music. And we thought to show you our animator a bit closer and to have an interview with him about the song, art, and some interesting stuff which you might never have thought of. Today, we present to you Nick Rutter. So, hey Nick, I sent you a whole album to choose a song from, which you would be working with, and you picked up a first one. How so?
Yeah, I mean, mainly the song gave me the most ideas, to be honest. But I think once I started getting those ideas and really listening to the song, I realised how deep it is. You know, it's not just about drug addiction, but it's also about why people become drug addicts. And I do think there's a hell of a lot of conservative thinking still stuck around in this country. I mean, you know, I think this country's very good in a lot of ways. It does do its best, but I still think that some of the thinking's a little bit archaic. And Gabor Mate, a Canadian psychologist, he talks about the fact that, you know, society has sort of this sort of high expectations on people, which are actually kind of counter nature. And so we're all kind of addicts in a sense, particularly with the drug addicts. He says that often they will not, for one reason or another, not develop the right kind of dopamine circuitry. So they quite often will only feel alive for the first time when they start taking drugs. And so in a lot of senses, it's genuinely not their fault, but we still victim blame, because it kind of really talks about this idea that punishment only makes it worse, because punishment's kind of what got them in that state in the first place. What really we kind of need as a society is a sort of stronger leadership. And I think really quite often, like say Jordan Peterson will talk about what people need is to sort of essentially get back to the problem. But quite often what I think he says is incredibly sort of pro-status quo. And I just don't think it's a sort of copy and paste solution for everyone. Like if his ideas really did work, then none of it would work, because he says, you know, what you need to do is take leadership and responsibility. Well, not everyone can do that because the opportunities just aren't there. I mean, I don't really know the solution to that, but I mean, I think it is somewhere in a lot more freedom. I mean, if I was running the world, I would definitely be looking at the idea of giving people free money, free accommodation, and just seeing what people can do rather than having a sort of money-based outcome. I mean, probably quite counterintuitive to like a lot of people in this country who would probably assume that giving people free stuff would mean that everyone would just sit around and get drunker all the time. Actually, when the experiments have been done on this, it shows that people are actually more productive because they're not forced into jobs that they don't want to do or they would never do unless they had to, and it actually creates more like drive and passion. I think that's the thing that I notice about people who really don't ever recover from addiction, is that they never find anything to replace it with, and that label becomes their life. And I think, like, particularly for drug addicts, you need something that is more of a drug than the drug, which is probably hippy-dippy stuff, but, you know, we do live in an idealistic world. It's just, I don't think the ideals are that good for everyone, you know. But, you know, looking into the future, you know, there's going to be a lot of automation, so these are ideas that, I mean, if you really, like, think about, like, what drives crime in inner cities, and it's probably not the individual as much as it is a sense of desperation and being hammered with advertising of what it is to be, you know, worthy in this world, and how do you attain that. And yeah, it's quite a damaging sort of, I guess it's kind of like freakonomics, and it probably works on some levels but causes a lot of destruction on others. But yeah, I think that's what really drew me to this song, was like, of course it's just about sort of drug addicts and why, but you know, that why is such a broad question that I kind of, I think hopefully have hinted at enough at the with the artwork, but yeah, I thought, so much to talk about in that song, so it was awesome to be able to get involved with that.
Cool. Really interesting. And looking at your art, one of the first things in my head was, what is your inspiration with your art and your cartoons?
My inspiration, I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably a hell of a lot that sort of has inspired me over the years, but it'd be hard to nail down. I think really just sort of, I tend to just do what I see, and like with your song, it just screamed German expressionism. I really like this idea of like determinism in there, which is obviously sort of, if you have a certain mindset in a certain situation, then the outcome's inevitable. I really liked playing with that in this sort of sense that, are we in a sort of bad karma path or something, and there's a sort of some puppet master pulling the strings and walking you through this, so I kind of quite like that idea. And I just really listened to the song, and there's quite a lot of Jungian psychology in there, and I sort of drew from an artist called Peter Burkhausen, and sort of these ideas of, well, what is the right way to grow up? Is there a right way to grow up, or is a lot of it sort of projection of societal values onto you, and maybe that they're right, maybe they're not, but sort of Jungian psychology argues not, as far as I can tell. But obviously, I think there'd probably be a lot of philosophy that would say, actually, we do need a level of conformity and cooperation and stuff. So, I think that was kind of a lot of the inspiration. But I mean, as far as the drawings go, I think I've just kind of I don't know where some of it comes from. Some of it, like, I have weird dreams occasionally, and I think I kind of draw upon those, especially these sort of darker ideas. I think maybe a lot of Tim Burton in there. But yeah, I mean, it's just a sort of, as I've gone along and drawn, it's kind of where my imagination takes me, really.
Cool, thank you. Another lovely answer. And how long did it took you to make this music video?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, man, it was about 2 weeks, and then a bit of touching up towards the end. So probably, I don't know, I mean, hours-wise, it'd be really hard to say. I know I did burnt out and did 24 hours solid when I was just on the sort of buzz of doing it. It is like a drug when you're on it, and especially when things are going well, like, it gets a bit of a grind when you're forcing yourself to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I think when you got something that you are like passionate about, time just flies by.
Wicked. Sounds like a lot of work. So, you've been talking about a lot of interesting philosophical topics, and let's take one more and discuss about the art and the role of an artist. What do you think?
Yeah, the role of an artist. I think really the role of an artist is to sort of paint a picture of, unapologetically paint a picture of the way you see the world. It's not really to tell people what to think, it's more to like inspire people to think and ask questions. And so that's why I think Southpark is probably the greatest sort of intellectual program I've ever seen. And for like 20 years it managed to do that uninhibited. Facing right now is a very strange time where actually artists are incredibly silenced thanks to like cancel culture. And I think that's a sort of mistake, because Southpark actually called out systemic racism, I think in like season 2, like long before the cancel culture came along. I think because it's kind of, they were quite uninhibited and, took the piss out of things in quite extreme ways, but they did it right across the board. And it wasn't really ever personal, but I think they just obviously were quite exposed to this kind of criticism. But I think that's a great tragedy, because it's, there's not really anything particularly progressive about silencing voices, especially that kind of voice where it was very intellectual and like raised decent questions. And I think by like cancelling that, it's actually a very pro sort of conservative and right-wing message that the left wing are screaming, because it essentially stops you from challenging ideas. And there is a lot of like philosophy about why cancel culture is actually damaging for the people it's trying to protect. I mean, I'm not going to go into it all, but I think that is, in a nutshell, why that Southpark actually was progressive, and art is a sort of driving force for progression, because it kind of has that ability to mock and play with and show a different light to it. Southpark spoke to the people that probably need to hear it most. It probably was never designed for the people that probably find it offensive. I think in a free society, we do need variety. I personally found it very funny, not for the reasons that it's criticised for, but for the incredibly intelligent content that it was. You know, like, it probably appealed to the EDL and all of that lot, you know. By like cancelling that sort of message, you're actually stopping progression, I think. And I mean, I don't think there shouldn't be limits, but I don't think Southpark was ever pushing people to be racist. I think that's the difference. I think, you know, people point to it as if it was racist for these very simplistic reasons, but it consistently mocked racism. And I think that's the problem with cancel culture, is it just looks for anything to scream and shout about. And I do think there's like such an element of sensationalism to it. Like Dave Chappelle was in the news like recently for his stand-up tour, which was supposedly anti-trans, and like all the headlines jump at it and they point to this like one segment of it, and like when you actually watch the show, he is incredibly pro-trans throughout. He just kind of takes the mick out of him in a like loving and light-hearted way. And I think that's the problem with cancel culture, is it's kind of a thoughtless response, a sort of very trying to do the right thing but in the wrong way.
Yeah, sure. The funny thing, I never thought of Southpark and as an art form. It was more like a comedy for me, but when you point out those things, it might be an art. Yeah, cool, interesting. And the last question, what about your other projects? I think that some of our listeners might be interested in it after watching Tale of Loneliness.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of projects coming up, doing some animated credit sequences for this film, which is, I think it's a really cool story about sort of a bunch of deadbeats getting a second chance, and sort of this idea of sort of determinism and not really being their fault and trying to sort their lives out. And it's a really cool sort of project to be involved with. And I'm also on the process of making a sort of short film, which again is like, hopefully one day I'm gonna step away from sort of dealing with like dystopian ideas, but I think, you know, there's a lot of playfulness there, and I'm doing this sort of idea about there's a psychological theory, which is kind of really what your song that you originally asked me to do was about. Like, we're living in a mental plague, and this idea that at times of like when Nazis take over, it's like a mass psychosis where people who would never do certain things on an individual level, once they get sucked into this idea, like ideologies and stuff, then they do unspeakable things. I don't think we're living in anything quite as extreme as that, but I think it is like still just an interesting idea, because you take Brexit, a lot of very intelligent, sane people were left scratching their heads as to why they voted for Brexit when it turned out to ruin their business. I think that is just a sort of manipulation of politics to sort of push this idea of like it's British to leave the EU, and you know, friends were suddenly becoming enemies and beating each other up in the pubs and things. So I think that's an idea that I kind of want to play with on this. It's early days, so I don't know how much that will come through, but I'm definitely excited for it. It's starting to look cool. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but I think that's sort of the principal idea. As to where you can follow me, I'm on YouTube as nickrutter8@gmail.com. Hopefully there'll be new content coming up soon. And I'm also on Instagram as nickrutter8, I think, but if you want to post a link, that'd be awesome.
Yes, of course. All the links is in the post. And it's been really lovely talking to you, Nick. And our conversation is coming to the end. And I'd like to tell you a big, big, big thank you, mate. It was really lovely talking to you. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Man. Keep talking to each other. And you, man, and you, always.